day everyone, my name is Enrico Pananganan, BS Criminology 2 at Negros Oriental State University Main Campus 1 and 2, CA-200 Institutional Correction. So for today's video, we will be discussing or learning about something on Module 2. This is all about the history, philosophy, and objectives of imprisonment and the development of prisoners like Sing Sing Prison, Auburn System, Pennsylvania System, 5 deployment of prisoners, forms of punishment, age of enlightenment, personnel behind the correctional institution, Cesar, Marquess of Vicaria, Bonsea, Cesar Lombroso, William the Conquirer, Enrico Ferry, and Clifford Show. So, let's go. CA-200 Section A, this is all about institutional corrections, and in Module 2, we will be discussing further all about the Sing Sing Prison and others. So, let's go. So, in Lesson 2, we will be discussing, or I will be discussing, and we will be learning as well on the following. First, Sing Sing Prison. Second, Auburn System, Pennsylvania System, and the difference between Auburn and Pennsylvania System. 5 development prisoners, forms of punishment, age of enlightenment, and the personalities behind correctional institution. We have here Cesar, Marquess of Vicaria, Bonsea, Cesar Lombroso, William the Conquirer, and Enrico Ferry, and Clifford Show. So, Sing Sing Prison, this is correctional facility, maximum security prison located at Ossining, New York, in use since around 1826. It is one of the oldest penal institutions in the United States, and then it is also among the most well-known in the country basically, and then especially this one is very notable for its harsh conditions in around 19th to 20th centuries. So before I will be discussing further on my PowerPoint presentation for today, let me lead your ears and listen carefully and watch my video presentation. So this is all about the history of Sing Sing Prison that was originally...
They say one shouldn't make assumptions, but I'm willing to bet that my audience here at Cityscape are sophisticated and intelligent people. So I want to ask you guys this question. What comes to your mind when you think of history? Those of you with a political inclination might think of the rise and decline of empires. The technocrats among us might think of scientific breakthroughs throughout the ages. Yet still, others with a more social viewpoint might think of movements in terms of human rights. While all of these are valid ways of looking at human evolution, few people think of prison when the word history comes to mind. The location of this episode is here to show that this deliberately forgotten corner of society has contributed greatly to not just New York City, but American culture in general. This is the story of Sing Sing Prison. Sing Sing is a maximum security prison located in Ossining, New York. Most people actually don't realize how close it is to the city. If you live in Brooklyn, for an example, Sing Sing is only an hour drive away. This close proximity to the Big Apple is an important feature of the prison's future development, as we will see later in this episode. But before we get into what the future holds, let's take a look at the past and see how this renowned place came to be. In 1797, New York City built its very first prison in the neighborhood we now know as Greenwich Village. The name of this correctional facility was Newgate Prison, and it was designed to hold 432 inmates. By 1821, however, the prison was holding 817 inmates, nearly twice its capacity. Newgate Prison could not handle New York City's growing population, so something had to be done. The New York legislature gave Elam Lenz, a former U.S. Army captain, the task of constructing a new modern prison. After some searching, Lenz chose a small village named Sing Sing as a location site for this new prison. The name Sing Sing comes from the Native American word sing sink, which means stone upon stone, or a stony place. This name actually hints as to why this was a location selected. You see, the area is called a stony place because it has a large quantity of limestone, also known as Sing Sing marble, For a total cost of $20,100, the state acquired 130 acres at the village of Sing Sing in 1825. In May of that year, Captain Lenz transported 100 convicts from Auburn prison to Sing Sing. When the prisoners arrived, however, there were no buildings to house them. That's right, the convicts would have to build their own prison. To construct their cell block, the prisoners excavated marble from a nearby quarry. Temporary shelters to house them from the elements were used in the meantime. Trained carpenters and builders were also there to direct labor. Construction of the first building took 3 years. The prisoners occupied the cells they had built on November 23, 1828. Now that the prisoners were properly incarcerated, Sing Sing would make its first mark in history by streamlining a prison methodology that would be known as the New York System. In the early 19th century, there were two penal philosophies competing for dominance, the Auburn system and the Pennsylvania system. Both of them have ecclesiastical roots. The Pennsylvania system drew heavily on monastery-style solitary confinement. Prisoners were to be alone at all times. This was to force them to constantly reflect on their crimes, while at the same time prevent a prison subculture from flourishing. Prisoners could see the chaplain, but not each other. Their time in prison would be a period of long, silent reflection. The Auburn system, on the other hand, allowed prisoners to work in groups during the day, but were kept in solitary confinement only at night. The Auburn system had a large Quaker influence. Its goal was to rehabilitate prisoners by teaching them strong work ethics, discipline, and respect for the property of others. Even though the prisoners worked in groups, a strict silence was enforced at all times. Prisoners would be flogged bloody if they broke this law of silence. Other notable elements of the Auburn system were striped uniforms and walking in lockstep. The striped uniform made prisoners immediately recognizable. So if a prisoner escaped, the public can easily distinguish them from the non-criminal population. As a kid, I used to see the Street Fighter character Cody wear the striped uniform, but had no idea it came from Sing Sing. Anyway, Captain Lenz adopted the Auburn system to run Sing Sing prison, so prisoners there worked in groups during the day and were solitary confined at night. The system was enforced by whipping and other brutal punishments, such as a naked cold shower bath. There's records of one Irish prisoner who was so brutalized by weekly floggings that he had forgotten how to use a knife and fork and could not stop walking in lockstep, even after being released from prison. One prisoner describes the lashing of a fellow inmate. It went as follows. 2 guards were flogging the skin off the body, and the inmate was begging, crying, and twisting under the lacerating that tore the skin off his back. These lashing took place in a central hall so that the screaming from the inmate can be heard by other prisoners. The blood spill was also left there for others to see as a warning sign. Other interesting punishments were the iron cage. The prisoner was forced to keep a cage on his head 24 hours a day. This cage was a heavy burden during the day and a sleep depriver at night. Water torture was a favorite form of punishment because it did not disfigure the inmate. Another punishment was a darkened cell. A prisoner was simply shoved in a dungeon with no light, no food, and no water. Time in a cell depended on the severity of the trespass, or how much the guards didn't like you. The main business of Sing Sing was not corporal punishment, however, but production. The biggest steel mill in the country at the time had about 1,000 employees. With over 1,200 convict laborers, Sing Sing was the largest factory in the United States, and possibly the world. Prisoners silently worked 10-hour shifts in a local quarry, but production was not just limited to the extraction of marble. Convicts produced boots, hats, barrels, carpets, brushes, and even parts of sophisticated machinery such as boilers. There were no visitations allowed. Not even a letter could be received. You weren't even allowed to sing at Sing Sing. Despite how horrible this sounds, Sing Sing was viewed as a model prison because it turned out a profit immediately. The marble Sing Sing prisoners' mine were used for notable buildings such as NYU, Grace Church in Manhattan, and the New York State Capitol building in Albany. Little did they know, but this was the infancy of what would become a huge business complex. The Auburn system would be nationally adopted and become known as the New York system. Many companies would also become hooked to this cheap prison labor. So the next time you hear about the prison industrial complex, just remember it all started at Sing Sing. Sing Sing made history in other ways. The first women penitentiary was opened there in 1839. It was called Mount Pleasant Female Prison. There was apparently nothing pleasant about that place. A Sing Sing chaplain named John Lucky described in his book, Prison Sketches, the tale of a female inmate gone insane. When released, she wandered the streets of New York with her Bible in one hand and shoes in the other. The female prison wing of Sing Sing was considered a failed experiment and closed in 1877. 11 years later, in 1888, New York State was in search of a more humane method of execution. As a result, Governor Daniel Hill signed a bill authorizing the use of the electric chair, because frying you to death is more humane than the rope. It is important to note here that New York was the first state to adopt the electric chair in the entire country, and it didn't take long for Sing Sing to turn this legislation into action. Sing Sing got its electric chair in 1890. They named it Old Sparky. On July 17, 1891, Harris Smaller was the first person executed by the electric chair at Sing Sing. 4 other prisoners were also executed that same day. Electric chair executions had a schedule, 11 p.m. at night, every Thursday. Old Sparky apparently had a long career in Sing Sing, frying 614 people, 8 of which were women. What I find interesting, and even borderline sadistic, is that the staff went out of their way to make sure prisoners did not escape the electric chair, placing all sorts of measures to prevent the death row inmate from committing suicide. There are even instances of staff surgeons performing a diligent operation to rescue an inmate that poisoned himself. There was no cheating the electric chair at Sing Sing. You had to see Old Sparky. Famous victims included Francis Two Gun Crowley and Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, a civilian couple who were found guilty of providing atomic secrets to the Soviet Union. In 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled the death penalty is unconstitutional due to the fact that its application was inconsistent and arbitrary. Old Sparky was then transferred to the Green Haven Correctional Facility and never used again. You probably think Sing Sing is something of a nightmare, and it was. But to be fair, I must say that the prison has also shown progressive reforms. Lockstep was abolished in 1900. Striped uniforms were also gone 4 years later. Inmates were gradually permitted freedom such as speaking, and recreational activities such as baseball for inmates were also introduced in 1930. Legend has it that Babe Ruth apparently hit his longest home run in an exhibition game against the Sing Sing baseball team, the Black Sheep. I kind of like that name. Sing Sing is also the cultural birthplace of terms like the last mile, which referred to the final trip for the electric chair. It also spawned the term up the river, or up north, which means going to prison. Many people think this saying has roots in hip-hop, but the term far predates it. Remember, Sing Sing was built in 1825. America was just 49 years old at the time. As we speak, there are initiatives to turn a part of Sing Sing prison into a museum. Its close proximity to the city makes it an ideal attraction for millions of New Yorkers and tourists alike. Oddly enough, I actually think this is a good idea. Not because I like prisons, but because our children need to witness the collective insanity that once plagued society. The process of turning a portion of Sing Sing into a museum is still in the works. However, those of you who want an experience now can visit the smaller prison museum that is already operating on Main Street. I am not an expert in crime and punishment, but the idea of rehabilitating someone by plunging them in abnormally harsh conditions makes no sense to me. Humans of the future will have a morality far superior than ours. I'm certain that they will come up with far better solutions to crimes than what we currently have. I once read in a book by Nikola Tesla that humanity is a single organism. If that statement is true, then these so-called criminals are just different versions of myself, just like I am a different version of you. Although not always guiltless, I sincerely believe that most prisoners are just misunderstood. We should really ask ourselves, how did they become that way? I'm sure their story would dissolve many barriers. As we learn to communicate better as people, crimes will decline. Until then, we can do our part by listening more and judging less. See you next time.
Okay. So that was the history of Sing Sing Prison and Hudson River at Ossining, New York. So, Sing Sing Prison. When we talk about Sing Sing Prison, that was a maximum security prison located in Passings, New York. That was Ossining, New York. It is also among the most well-known in the country, especially notable for its harsh conditions in the around 19th to 20th century. So, in today's generation, in today's an old prison raises old questions about jails. The University of Houston College of Engineering presents this series about the machines that make our civilization run and the people whose ingenuity created them. And then in around 1825, the state of New York struggled with the riddle what to do with criminals. What to do basically with criminals. 2 years before, they tried complete isolation from society, from one another, from all stimulation. When that failed miserably, they switched to a model that involved prisoners doing hard together in silence. So, originally known as Mount Pleasant Prison, it was constructed in the village of Sing Sing on the east bank of the Hudson River. And then it was designed to provide additional prison space and to replace Newgate Prison. Construction was undertaken in 1825 by convict laborers under the supervision of Elam Lenz. And then the 4-story complex was soon 6 stories, and the prison eventually housed more than 106,000 inmates, because most of the early convicted criminals traveled by boat to Sing Sing. The phrase up the river came to mean going to prison. So in 1901, 3 years after Edison introduced the electric chair of Sing Sing, the town changed its name to Ossining so people wouldn't confuse it with a jail. And then the 1828 prison was a stark gray stone, no trace for ornamentation. Reform was clearly his first priority, and he viewed the death penalty as a useless deterrent. And then today, the aviary is gone. Sing Sing is a grim as ever, and we muddle hopelessly over the hard questions. Like the crime museum's collections once held a cell lock from New York's Singing Prison built around 1825. One of the penologists of the era declared that in order for the inmates to fully confront the repent their criminal past, penological thought at the time believed that there was a very strong connection between a prison's architecture. And then one of the notable visitors to the prison was Alexis de Tocqueville, author of Democracy in America. The French government sent him a Gustave de Beaumont to the United States in around 1831 to gather information about the American penal system. And then the two men were amazed at the total subjugation which is under prisoners' work and the administrative power the warden wielded at Sing Sing prison. So the resulting complex was as quiet as a stone town, and then the village of Sing Sing was named after the local Indian tribes. The prison followed, and then inmates could neither speak to each other nor ironically could they sing. And then as a result, Sing Sing became one of the most repressive institutions in America. Sing Sing was also the site of reforms that affected the national penal system. Reformer Thomas Mott Osborne, who developed his penology theories while voluntarily incarcerated for a year at Auburn. So that was served at Sing Sing Garden in around 1914 to 1915 and 1916. It is also became one of the famous prisons. As I've said earlier, Hollywood gangster films often feature Sing Sing in their resolutions. And despite an iconic and chilling reputation, it is an ominous warehouse of society's worst criminals. That was recently there was attempt to close the doors at Sing Sing forever. So they had hoped to convert Sing Sing's at around 60 acre and at the Riverside campus into an area of shops and condominiums. The site has been described as beautiful with phenomenal views and offers spectacular sunsets. that would not close any maximum security prisons that house dangerous murderers and rapists and others who had been convicted of major crimes. So, during his tenure, however, the first psychological work with inmates began. More reforms were instituted under Lewis Edward Laws, who served as warden from 1920 to 1941. He is also notably improved that living conditions within the prisons and allowed inmates to participate in any sports like as I've said, baseball. That's one example of sports basically. So questions. Okay. First question is Sing Sing still a functioning prison? So basically, I'll be the one to answer this question. Yeah. So believe it or not, Sing Sing Correctional Facility, it is still operated up to this day. It is currently for me what I call this. It is a currently maximum security facility for male inmates that is operated by the New York State Department. Excuse me. State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. It is also currently houses approximately around 1,700 prisoners. So, is Sing Sing a rough prison? Sing Sing was once the talk of the nation, featured in many old movies and novels. It was a notoriously harsh place to serve one's time for both men and women. The first structure of Sing Sing prison was completed in around 1828, though male inmates who arrived before the date had to deal with a distinct lack of housing. How many acres is Sing Sing prison? Basically around 130. In 1825, the state of New York appropriated $20 and 100 to purchase a 130 hectare site on the Hudson River for what is now the Sing Sing Correctional Facility. How many prisoners are in Sing Sing? So, 1,700 incarcerated people. Sing Sing Correctional Facility is a maximum security prison operated by the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervisions in Ossining, New York. It houses about 107,000 incarcerated people, and it is located about 30 miles north of New York City on the bank of the Hudson River. So what famous people were Sing Sing prison? So as a result, Sing Sing became one of the most repressive institutions in America. It also became one of the most famous prisoners, basically. And then the notorious bank robber Willie Sutton served time and a later escaped from the Sing Sing. And then Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, the infamous communist spies, died in the electric chair there. And then, is Sing Sing a good person? Basically, Sing Sing involves Sing Sing Correctional Facility, maximum security prison located in Ossining, New York, in use since 1826. So it is one of the oldest penal institutions in the United States. And then aside from that, it's also among the most well-known in the country, especially notable for its harsh conditions. Okay. So Sing Sing prison. What to do now, Father? I am going to die like a killer, and I do not even remember killing. You can pray, my son. You are in the hands of God now, said the good priest. So that was the quotes regarding on happenings on the Sing Sing prison. Okay. Next is the Auburn State Prison. Prison located in Auburn, New York, opened in 1826. That was established disciplinary and administrative system based on silence, corporal punishment, and congregate group labor. So, Americans believe that industrialization and dramatic demographic, economic, and political upheavals and conspired. So, So in the early 19th century, many Americans believe that industrialization and dramatic demographic and economic upheavals had conspired. So that was against the traditional controls of family, church, and community. From their perspective, these moral guardians could no longer adequately control this order. So their solution was to create the penitentiary rather, or what we call new institution for reforming. So that was offenders and ultimately restoring social stability. And then Auburn originally used congregate cells, but in 1821, basically Warden William Britton borrowed the concept of solitary cells from the so-called Pennsylvania system. So Britton designed a unique 5-tiered cell block of 2 rows of single cells placed back to back in the center of the building. So this pattern of small inside cell blocks was later adopted by most state prisons in the United States. So this pattern of small inside cell blocks was later adopted by most state prisons in the United States. So whereas the Pennsylvania system's inmates did a handicraft work in their cells. So that was Auburn prisoners labored in congregate workshops, offsetting imprisonment caused by fulfilling private industry contracts. And then Auburn State Prison is briefly implemented a 3-level classification. Classification system that was under it minor offenders labored in workshops during the day and retired to separate cells at night. Then serious offenders alternated their days between solitary confinement and congregate work. So the most hardened criminals were placed in solitary confinement and congregate work. So the most hardened criminals were placed in solitary confinement without work. So after numerous suicides, instances of mental illness, and attempted escapes, the governor of New York terminated the classification system and the experiment in solitary confinement. So subsequently, all male inmates work in congregate shops by day, returning individual cells at night. So that was females first committed to Auburn in around 1825, were relegated to an attic and excluded from regular work and exercise. Flogging and other forms of corporal punishment enforced the rules. So this is such regimentation was thought necessary to restrain the rebellious nature of the offenders. And then regimentations was thought necessary to restrain. Overcrowding made the silent system unenforceable, and Auburn system of discipline deteriorated into corrupt and lax routines of harsh punishments. So after the Civil War, the spirit of reform withered, and contract labor was no longer profitable. That was because despite the demise of the ideal system, Auburn remained the model of the nearly a century, primarily because it had been inexpensive to construct and maintain. So unlike Auburn of Sing Sing, Pennsylvania System Penitentiary 1829, that was intended to keep convicts separate even as they work in order to prevent any earthly contamination of destruction that might impede their repentance. Hence the term penitentiary. So although Beaumont and Tocqueville found it incontestable that this perfect isolation secures the prisoners from all fatal contamination. And then they favored the more cost-effective Auburn plan, which seemed more likely to enable states to profit. And then Auburn Correctional Auburn Correctional Facility, it is a state prison on a state street in Auburn, New York, United States. So it was built on land that was once Cayuga village. And then aside from that, it is also classified as a maximum security facility. So number 3, Pennsylvania System. So when we talk about Pennsylvania System, this is a penal code based on the principle that solitary confinement fosters penitence and encourages reformation. So the idea was to advocated by the Philadelphia Society for alleviating the miseries of public prisoners, whose most active members was Quakers. So the idea was advocated by the Philadelphia Society. And then in 1829, the Eastern State Penitentiary on Cherry Hill in Philadelphia applied this so-called separate philosophy. So prisoners were kept in solitary confinement in cells 16 feet high and nearly 12 feet along, and then 7.5 feet wide, or 4.9 by 3.7 by 2.3 meters. So the Pennsylvania system spread until predominated in the European prisons. So the Pennsylvania system was superseded in the United States by the Auburn system. Critics in the United States argued that it was too costly and had deleterious effects on the minds of the prisoners. And then the Pennsylvania also was a system superseded in the United States by the Auburn system. So the Pennsylvania system was an early prison system requiring inmate silence, individual cells, and inmates labor in those cells. So the Pennsylvania penal system that was originating in 1682 under the leadership of William Penn, that was the first state prison system to suggest the replacement of torture and mutilation as punishment for crimes with hard labor in houses of corrections. So what is the difference between the Pennsylvania system and the Auburn system? So we'll be discussing further about this, because this two system was two conviction when regard to Sing Sing prison. So the Auburn system was criticized for its being too harsh in punishment and lack of having rehabilitative potential. So while the Pennsylvania system was criticized for its being too costly due to their focus in solitary confinement, what they so-called. So 4, abuse treatment and programs of Sing Sing prison. So, when we talk about alcohol and substance abuse treatment program, that was the drug and alcohol abuse programs offer different forms of structured treatment designed to help people struggling with addiction. So, talk therapy, like counseling, that was the most commonly used treatment. For substance misuse, therapy is a treatment that helps people with emotional, physical, and mental health problems functions better. Next, anger management program. If your anger is interfering with your relationships, work, or life, you might benefit from anger management services. Maybe you need to complete an anger management course for a court requirement, or you want to do some self-help work. So, cognitive behavior therapy. So this is the treatment of choice for anger management. According to Engel, she says it can help you understand. It can help you understand your triggers for anger, develop and practice coping skills, and think, feel, and behave differently in responsive to anger. So you are calmer and more in control, basically. Educational vocational programs. That is prepares people to work as a technician or to take up employment in a skilled craft or trade. As a trade person or artisan, vocational education is sometimes referred to as career and technical education. Family development program, it promotes the importance of building a strong foundation for early learning that begins by honoring each family's home, culture, and first language. So we need to recognize the strands every child and their family bring to educational success. So, They envision a future for New Mexico where the well-being of our children and their families is at the heart of everything we do. Guidance and counseling services. When we talk about guidance and counseling services, this was the major aim of guidance counseling. It is the encourage students' academics, social, emotional, and personal development. To reach this aim, guidance counseling services help the students to get to know themselves better and to find effective solutions to their daily problems, basically. Library and low library services. So this one is the resources and activities provided by libraries to address information's needs of users. This one include from circulation services, reference services, online information services, library loans, and information literacy skills training. And then, wait for a while, guys. And then the major aim of guidance counselor, sorry. So, reserve books, audiovisual material, periodicals, reference books, so reference services, online reservation system, recommend an item, interlibrary loan service, photocopying, printing service, orientation and information sessions, and then selective dissemination of information. Next one is the recreational program. So when we talk about recreational programming, is designing, staging, and delivering leisure opportunities by intervening in social interactions by manipulating and creating environments in a manner that maximize the probability that those who enter them will have the leisure experience, so they need to seek. And then recreation programs was designing, staging, and delivering leisure opportunities by intervening in social interactions. Religious services, a church service or a service of worship. This is a formalized period of Christian communal worship often held in a church building. So this is often but not exclusively occurs in Sunday or Saturday in the case of those churches practicing Seventh-day Sabbatanism. So, yeah. Sex offender treatment programs. So when we talk about counseling and treatment program or SOCTP, this is a comprehensive program of counseling and treatment offered by the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision for convicted sex offenders and other incarcerated individuals. And then temporary release programs. This one is referred to programs which allow to release of a prisoner from the place of his or her imprisonment for a limited period. Then it will help him or her in the transition of prisoners from prison to the community. Trauma programs. So we need this treatment usually involves psychotherapy and counseling medication or a combination. Like options of psychotherapy will be especially tailored for managing trauma. So they include like cognitive processing therapy and then also known as cognitive restructuring. So this one is the individual learns how to think about things in a new way. Transitional Services Program. This was viewed as a coordinated set of activities for student designed within an outcome-oriented process that promotes movement from school or out-of-school activities. Veteran Services. So when we talk about veteran services, this was maybe classified as a disabled veteran, recently separated veteran, active duty wartime or campaign badge veteran, or armed forces service medal veteran. Volunteer services and programs. Tasks such as reforestation, cleaning up beaches, nature trail construction, and invasive species management are just some volunteer work examples. So these volunteer rules are often very hands-on and physically demanding as you spend long days or weeks on your feet and out in the elements. Next is the different types of criminal punishment. Okay. So first is incapacitation. Incapacitation in the context of criminal sentencing philosophy is one of the functions of punishment. So, wait. So, incapacitation, this is a punishment, can be traced to an ancient times. Deterrence, mate, and Hong Lu right in punishment. A comparative historical perspective, banishment was a common penalty in antiquity. And then, it involves capital punishment, sending an offender to prison or possibly restricting their freedom in the community to protect safe society and prevent that person from committing further crimes. And then later, it was common for colonizing European countries to ship convicts and undesirables overseas. So in modern times, house arrest, incarceration, and death penalty are all forms of incapacitation. And then findings by the Bureau of Justice, statistics, or should I say BJS, have brought the effectiveness of this method into question. According to BJS data, about 2/3 or 67.8% of prisoners released back into society were arrested for a new crime within 3 years, and about 3/4 or 76.6% were arrested within 5 years. Despite these findings, incapacitation is a common form of punishment in the United States. And then, incapacitation prevents also future crime by removing the defendant from society. For example, of incapacitation are incarceration, house arrest, or execution pursuant to the death penalty. So next, deterrence. When we talk about deterrence, this is the crime prevention's effects of the treatment of punishment. It is a theory of choice in which individuals balance and benefits and cost of crime. So the goal of deterrence is to persuade citizens and possible offenders or reoffenders to conform to the rules of law. And then deterrence also is the use of punishment to stop potential criminals from committing crimes. And then Cesar Beccaria, she is a classical criminologist, theories that criminals would choose to break the law only after considering the risks and rewards for their actions. Next one is retribution. Retributive justice responds to criminal behavior that focuses on the punishment of lawbreakers and the compensation of victims. So in general, the severity of the punishment is proportionate to the seriousness of the crime. Retribution also, as one of the oldest forms of punishment, retribution was roots in the Judeo-Christian tradition of justice. Next is rehabilitation. When we talk about rehabilitation, it is a central goal of the correctional system. This goal rests on the assumption that individuals can be treated and diseased for crime. So, a common prison policy in America up until the 1970s, rehabilitation focuses on the helping criminals and prisoners overcome the barriers that led them to committing criminal acts. This includes developing occupational skills as well as resolving psychological issues such as drug addiction and aggressions. Explain the American Psychological Association, or APA. This is considered the opposite of retribution, and then the ultimate purpose of rehabilitation is to transition offenders back into society. So, complemented with community-based approaches can prove effective in reducing offender recidivism. Rehabilitation also was a central feature of corrections in the first half of the 20th century. Restoration. When we talk about restoration or restorative justice practices, victims, offenders, and communities affected by a particular offense find a way to restore or make amends for the harm resulting from an offense. So, Restoration also is a radically approach to a criminal punishment. The goal of restoration is for the offender to make direct amends to both the victim and the community in which the crime was committed. Although a relatively new practice in modern times, the concept of restorative justice can be found in the early legal system of Western Europe, like ancient Hebrew justice and pre-colonial African societies. So during the process of restoration, victims initiate a process in which both they and the offender meet to share feelings and concerns. So the dialogue here offers victims the opportunity to be heard, and the offender to make amends and receive forgiveness. So restorative justice is often used in crimes involving youth offenders. So the next topic, or the last topic, so this one is the personalities behind correctional institutions. So this was so nice. So we'll be talking about the person behind institutional correction basically. So first, who is he? By the way, he is Caesar. He is well remembered for his treatise on crimes and punishments in around 1764, which condemned torture and the death penalty, and was a founding work in the field of penology and the classical school of criminology. So Cesar Beccaria is considered the father of modern criminal law and the father of criminal justice. Next is Marquis of Beccaria Bonsea. So, Beccaria believed that people have a rational manner and apply it toward making choices that will help them achieve their own personal gratification. So, in Beccaria's interpretation, that law exists to preserve the social contract and benefit society as a whole. And then Cesar Lombroso. We all know that Cesar Lombroso is the father of criminology. He is the father of criminology. This is a result that Lombroso became known as the father of modern criminology. He is the one of the first to realize that crime and criminals could be studied scientifically. So, Lombroso's theory of the born criminal dominated thinking about criminal behavior in the late around 19th and early 20th century, I think. And then Cesar Lombroso is a famous among criminologists. His positivist criminology theory explained that some criminals were born that way and their criminal activities are a result of a nature, while other became criminals due to their experiences in life, or due to their what they see, or I don't know. Cesar Lombroso. He was the first person also to make crime and criminals a specific area of study. So that's why he's called the father of modern criminology. Basically, he was also the first person to write about female crime that he explained rather. Next, William the Conquirer. So William the Conquirer is usually known as William the Conquirer, and sometimes William the Bastard, was the first Norman king of England, reigning from around 1666 BC until his death on 1807. A descendant of Rollo, he was Duke of Normandy from 1335 onward. So, William the Conquirer also is... Yeah, that's it. Next one is Enrico Ferry. So, Enrico Ferry was an Italian criminologist, socialist, and student of Cesare Lombroso. He was also the founder of the Italian school of criminology, while Lombroso researched the purported psychological factors that motivated criminals. And then Enrico Ferry is investigated social and economic aspects. Next person is Clifford Shaw. Clifford Robichaud was an American sociologist and criminologist, and then he was he was a major figure in the Chicago School of Sociology during the 1930s and 1940s, and he also considered to be one of the most influential figures in American criminology. Okay. So that's it. I'm done with my reporting. I hope you guys are learning something. If you have any question, don't hesitate to PM me on my FB, Messenger account. So recap, Sing Sing in Full Sing Sing Correctional Facility, maximum security prison located in Ossining, New York. So in use since around 1826, it is one of the oldest penal institutions in the United States, and then it is also among the most well-known in the country, especially notably for its harsh conditions in the 19th and 20th centuries. So for this day, we have done tackling or discussing all about on the Sing Sing prison, Auburn system, Pennsylvania system, 5 development prisoners, forms of punishment, age of enlightenment, and then the personalities behind correctional institution. We have here Cesar, Marquess of Beccaria, Boncia, Cesar Lombroso, William the Conquirer, Enrico Ferry, and Clifford Robichaud. Always remember that Sing Sing prison that was originally history on Hudson River at Ossining, New York. So thank you. Bye.